This video was brought to you by Imprint. A couple of years ago, very few people had heard of Sue Gray. She worked in the civil service, in the background, and was regularly rumoured to have extraordinary levels of power within the organisation, to the extent that a former Cabinet Office minister claimed that she runs Britain. A few years later, though, she was tasked with looking into the behaviour of the government in relation to the Partygate scandal, and was subsequently hired by the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, as his chief of staff. In this role, she conducted a review to see what the main challenges would be for a Labour government were they to win power at the upcoming general election. In total, she identified 6 such challenges. As our more attentive viewers will have noticed, the UK did hold a general election this year, and Labour did indeed come back to power after 14 years out in the wilderness. So with this in mind, let's have a look through Gray's list, looking at what she identified as some potential problem points, whether they've caused a problem for the government yet, and, if so, how the government has gone about addressing them. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Now, we can break up this list into 2 categories: crises the government has yet to face, and crises the government is in the process of addressing. And let's start with those 2 crises that the government is currently addressing. The most publicised of the 2 is probably the prison overcrowding scandal, as it interacts somewhat uncomfortably with the recent riots in the UK. In essence, prison capacity was approaching breaking point even before these riots, and understandably, the government is keen to ensure that there are enough prison spaces for any convicted rioters. The current occupation capacity for prisons in the UK is 89,191, and as of Friday last week, 87,893 people were in prison. Now, to be fair, the last Conservative government already recognised that this was something of a crisis, and introduced something called the Early Release Scheme. Originally, it allowed certain prisoners to be released 18 days early, but this was expanded to 35 days in March and 70 days from early May onwards. Now, it was only available to prisoners that had served 50% of their sentence already, and in total, 10,000 prisoners were released early as part of the scheme. Now, the Labour government has decided to go even further with this scheme, with them planning to reduce the threshold to offenders who have served 40% of their sentence. Now, it's important to point out that this scheme would only apply to certain prisoners, not those who are in prison for sexual offences, violent offences, or terrorist offences. In addition to this, the government has also introduced something called Operation Early Dawn, which will see defendants held in police cells and not summoned to magistrate court until space is available in prison. So Labour have made a start on this crisis, but there's still a long way to go. The next ongoing crisis is public sector pay negotiations, specifically that of junior doctors and rail workers and drivers. In the case of doctors, upon Labour's election last month, striking had taken place for 20 months, and their main ask was for so-called pay restoration. Basically, every year since about 2009, junior doctors have received below-inflation pay rises, meaning that they have taken real terms pay cuts. In order for pay restoration to be achieved, junior doctors would now need to receive a 35% increase in pay, which, given the current economic circumstances, is unfortunately quite a big ask. The Labour government has offered a 22.3% pay rise over the next 2 years, which is more than the Conservatives previously offered them. And the British Medical Association is currently balloting members as to whether they should accept this. Similarly, rail workers were also negotiating with the government to try and achieve a new pay settlement. Mick Lynch, who runs the RMT union, told The Times that he's aiming to achieve a parallel synchronised offer to that of the ASLEF union, which represents train drivers. Last week, ASLEF was offered a 3-year pay deal by the government, which included a 4.5% pay rise this year. Now, it's not yet known whether Lynch will achieve a similar deal for his union, but it's clear that the Labour government are putting effort into resolving issues with unions. However, the real question will be, firstly, whether they're able to make offers that are reasonable to unions without spending too much, and secondly, whether such deals are accepted. And if they fail, they risk either overstretching the public purse or causing even more industrial action. Anyway, these are the 2 crises that Labour has already started to resolve. There are 4 more, though, that they haven't yet started to address, and the first of these relates to Thames Water. Back in 1989, prior to privatisation, Thames Water didn't have any debt at all. But since then, it's accumulated £15.4 billion worth of debt. Now, the issue is that the current owners of Thames Water, Kemble, have recently defaulted on their debt payments, making them effectively insolvent. Obviously, considering that Thames Water serves around 16 million people, this is quite the dilemma. Kemble claim that they have enough money to keep them going until next May, and right now they're in a special administration scheme. But this can't last forever, and the government will have to intervene at some point. Raising bills for households is certainly an option, as is nationalisation, but both come with their own political issues for the Labour government. The second issue yet to be addressed is the ongoing universities crisis. Now, we've done a whole video on this in the past, so go and watch that if you want to know more. But the TLDR is that in part because student fees haven't risen with inflation, but also because of new immigration rules that are reducing the number of foreign students, many British universities are currently flirting with bankruptcy. None of the political solutions to this problem are easy either. Bailing out the struggling unis would both cost taxpayer money and make a mockery of what's supposed to be a competitive system. And raising student fees really wouldn't go down well with Labour's base. The third issue is the NHS funding shortfall. The issue here for Labour is that without steep cuts elsewhere, addressing this shortfall would either require a steep rise in taxes or more borrowing, both of which Labour have essentially ruled out. The fourth and final issue are bankrupt councils. For those of you who don't know, over the past few years or so, an increasing number of local authorities have been issuing Section 114 notices, which basically means that they've run out of money. Again, the dilemma for Labour here is that they can either force those local authorities to make steep cuts, despite the fact that local government funding already saw a drastic decrease under the Tories, or they can bail them out. But this would again require more money and possibly introduce a moral hazard into the local authority spending. If you want to keep learning, the very best way is through Imprint. That's the brand new way to learn, built from the ground up. And seriously, unless you've used the app before, you likely haven't experienced something like this. That's because Imprint is beautifully illustrated and animated, creating a highly visual, effective, and interactive learning experience built for bite-sized learning. Now, you can take advantage of their expansive library of courses, book summaries, and articles to learn about psychology, philosophy, leadership, the science of happiness, productivity systems, finance, science, technology, health and wellness, history, and more. Plus, you can learn about these things quickly, with most individual lessons taking just a few minutes to complete. That doesn't mean that it's light on information either, though. Imprint is built around the science of learning, so it helps you to build habits around learning, utilizes high-quality visuals to boost understanding, as well as letting users learn at their own pace. Ultimately, Imprint is a way to feel good about your screen time and learn something new, rather than just mindlessly scrolling on social media. So stop doom scrolling and start learning. You can do that by joining the millions of users already learning with Imprint by clicking the link in the description. And the first 200 people to sign up will get 20% off an annual plan. Plus, they'll know that you came from us.